Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking time out to attend this event. It's a big one for me, the official launch of my book. It's Logical, Innovating Profitable Business Models. A very big thank you. What I will do is I will take you on a short tour of what I have tried to communicate through the book, the philosophy behind the book, and some salient points that one can expect to pick up from it. I will speak for about 11 to 12 minutes, and then for the remaining 18 minutes or so, I will take questions from all of you. So keep posting in questions in the chat window. It's Logical, Innovating Profitable Business Models. That's the title of the book. The name is an oxymoron of sorts. How can logic and innovation go hand in hand? Does innovation happen as a random, unexpected aha moment? Well, in 1% of the cases, it may appear so, but it actually is not. I firmly believe innovation happens when you train your mind to think creatively, and that's about cultivating a mindset. Are there principles to do that? Absolutely, yes. And I have cited plenty of real examples from my entrepreneurial and consulting experience to prove that point. In this book, I have narrated many of these. Each chapter begins with a story, weaves in more examples, and ends with certain points that can be applied to any business. I refer to these as impressive impressions. At the end of every book, you will find these, at the end of every chapter, you will find these impressive impressions. Most of us think that innovation and creativity lie within the purview of genius. Through this book, I have attempted to debunk that myth and prove that with a sensible head on one's shoulders and a relentless focus on the user, anyone can become innovative. All of us are blessed with abundant gray matter that we fail to exploit. This book attempts to provide a pathway to exploit that innate potential within. Now, let me tackle the question why I chose to focus on innovation in business models. Right now, if I tell you to close your eyes and conjure up images of some cool, innovative stuff, about 99% of you will speak about an iPhone, Tesla cars, Google glasses, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, machine learning, space tech, etc., etc., etc. Do you see a common thread in these responses? All the things mentioned fall into two categories. One is high-end technologies, and two is physical, tangible products. That raises an obvious question in my mind. Why are we programmed to associate high-end technologies and physical proper products only with innovation? Is innovation restricted to only these categories? I wanted to break this stereotype and hence explore the track of business model innovation. In the book, I have explored how certain companies and startups in the last 10 years, one decade or so, how these certain companies and startups have innovated on the business model and brought large conglomerates down on their knees. And that too, without changing the final offering to the end user. How did these companies create breakthroughs? They did so through creating innovative business models. What can we learn from these? There are certain fundamental principles, some underlying traits that we can pick up from these examples and apply them to companies across domains. At the end of the book, there is a simple 6-point framework to enable the creation of unique and sustainable business models. If you ask me, what is the most striking feature of these so-called new age business models? I would say it is their ability to create win-win situations for every stakeholder involved in the ecosystem. Only when you create win-win situations for consumers, vendors, channel partners, affiliates, basically everyone involved, Only then are you able to create a synergy where everyone contributes their might and the entire model not only sustains itself but grows in geometric proportions. This is where I have introduced the concept of enlightened self interest. Enlightened self interest is a philosophy in ethics which states that persons who act to further the interests of others and the groups that they belong to ultimately serve their own self interest. When one rises above the tunnel vision of self interest and becomes aware of the fact that there are other stakeholders who have an interest in your well being, and so should you have in theirs, one then begins to move towards enlightened self interest. And when we have a critical mass of corporate executives and entrepreneurs who think through the lens of enlightened self interest, we will be able to create unique and sustainable business models. I sincerely believe it is not really that difficult to raise our thinking to a slightly higher plane of thinking. Is this a new concept? Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, literally translated, means the entire earth is one family. It's an ancient concept from our old Indian philosophy. It should not be alien to us. This concept directly translates into empathy, which is the latest buzzword doing rounds in management circles. In the current turbulent post COVID times, more than ever, there is a strong need for reimagining the way business needs to be conducted through deep empathy and exploring win win situations for all stakeholders involved. That brings me to the next point which the book addresses: empathy. Because empathy lies at the core of human connectivity. And when that happens, everything else just falls in place. So, are there simple tools by which one can enhance one's empathy quotient? Because that's the genesis of enlightened self interest, which is the genesis of being able to create win win situations. There are two sections comprising 8 chapters in the book dedicated to stories from my consulting experiences that draw out guidelines for enhancing one's empathy quotient. By delving deep into the user's psyche, one can easily come up with simple techniques to understand latent needs of users. There are real life stories from my consulting experience with large corporates as well as mentoring fledgling startups. These techniques evolved over the last 30 years of my professional career and are evolving as we speak. Let me share some of these techniques. How can one gamify user research? Because when you get anyone to play a game, that person puts her or his most competitive foot forward. And in the process, most of the psychological guards drop and the real choices and preferences surface. As a business problem solver, that is what you need to make happen to understand latent, unarticulated needs of users. And when you can consistently identify such needs, you will always be ahead of the pack. There are some stories to prove this point in the book. Point number 2: how can you narrow down to that one bullseye question that enables you to get to the crux of what consumers want rather than what they say? Users don't have time to spend with you. You have to make the most of the short time window you may get with them. So it's important to identify that one bullseye question that needs to be probed when you are eye to eye with a consumer. There are some techniques to do that discussed in the book. How does three-dimensional ethnography help in understanding consumer behavior? There is a case study of my work with the Mahindra Group in which how we were able to unearth the motivations of field employees to learn and upgrade oneself. The team spent 2 weeks just traveling along with these executives on their motorcycles, understanding their lives, their families, their likes, dislikes, favorite subjects, most hated subjects, etc., to create a highly engaging training video. That's in chapter number 9. Point number 4: how businesses can use the science of memetics to predict user behavior and visualize upcoming scenarios. Memetics is the science that studies why people imitate behavior. That is, the way genetics helps us predict physical heredity. Memetics helps us predict cultural heredity. That is, the way a gene is a unit of transmission of physical heredity. That is, why we resemble our parents and grandparents, etc. A meme is a unit why behavior gets replicated. That is, why do certain people behave in a certain manner? Why do they respond to a specific certain stimuli in a certain fashion? In chapter number 8, there is a case study of how, during the period 2005 to 2008, I, along with some of my students, studied the events happening in Bollywood and sports in India back then and predicted certain trends that actually turned out true during the period of 2009 to 2011. Point number 5, how companies should not just sell what they make, but make what might sell. I repeat, how companies should not just sell what they make, but make what might sell. Most companies work on the age-old system of monthly, quarterly, annual sales targets. They push what they produce in the market. They sell and oversell, and one day realize that the consumer no longer wants what they have been making for so long. To overcome this, how can we train executives to capture insights about user behavior that can equip companies to reinvent their offerings? That is, enable companies to make what might sell. That is, move from selling what you make to making what might sell. All these points are brought out through stories. Most are about what me and my clients did back then, while there are some where the client company did not have the risk appetite for disruption and therefore did not go with the solution provided. You, the reader, can judge for yourselves whether those suggestions, if acted upon, would have worked or not. That's for you to judge. Some stories are futuristic use cases through a crystal ball that I am sticking out my neck with. The jury is still out on them. Go through that, judge for yourself. In chapter number 14, I've shared a sort of a cheat sheet for developing a new product, service, or a system, or a new business model. Many a time, when we are in the thick of the operational side of business, we find time at a premium. Though we would like to do extensive user research, there are constraints in terms of time, manpower, etc. What should we do in such situations? This cheat sheet in chapter number 14 provides a framework of 73 attributes that an ideal product or service should have. And this framework will prove to be a good starting point to add features to your offering or imagine features for your offerings. I call it a cheat sheet because, to an extent, you can short circuit your user research. To an extent, I repeat. This framework will be handy not only while developing new products or services or systems or new business models, but also for upgrading your existing offerings. A third use case of this cheat sheet could be when you're doing a benchmarking exercise vis-a-vis competing offerings in the market. This would be useful for corporate executives as well as entrepreneurs. You'll find lots of applications with real examples in this chapter, as with all other chapters. Throughout the book, the emphasis is on application rather than jargon. In the 15th chapter, there is a case study of the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, wherein I was a part of a forum involved in solving disaster relief issues that had arisen during and after those gruesome attacks. That chapter delves deep into the process that we followed to come up with breakthrough solutions. That should convince readers about the fact that irrespective of the problem that you are grappling with, there is a broad framework which, if followed, leads to breakthrough creations, to breakthrough solution creation. It is a 9-step process that can be put to use in any domain, be it product innovation, service innovation, system innovation, even in non-business scenarios. The case study summarizes my philosophy: user first, technology later. User first, technology later. Two, map the entire ecosystem, stakeholder ecosystem, to create win-win situations. Three, be open to surprises in the information gathering phase. Four, be open to wild ideas. Even if they seem crazy and impossible to begin with, the dots always connect when the mind is open. Five, avoid bringing in technology too early in the problem solving process. Yes, think of technology, but let the right kind of technology get adapted at the right time in the whole problem solving process. Many a time we start the problem solving process with a technology in mind and we get fixated on it. Also, point number six, most importantly, do not begin the problem solving process with a solution in mind. When you do that, you get fixated with the solution and lose objectivity, which is so essential in the process of creating breakthroughs. These 6 points and the business model creation framework and various methods of delving deep into user psyches to be able to create win-win situations, not only for consumers, but for uh, channel partners, vendors, distributors, everybody in the ecosystem. That's what sums up my book. It's about 240 odd pages of brisk reading with lots of stories and takeaways at the end of every chapter. With this, I will stop and take questions. Before that, there is a gift for all of you who attended this live launch in the form of access to a chapter from the book. Do leave your contact details in the link displayed here. The link is pasted in the chat windows. And now I'm done speaking. Send in your questions. We can have a general chat. I will try to answer as many as we can in the remaining 10, 12, 15 minutes or so. You could type in your questions over there. I can take them. I can see a lot of congratulatory messages. Thank you all. If you have any questions about what I spoke, something that you don't agree with, please feel free to put it there. Somebody is asking me, is the hard copy, when is the hard copy going to come? Well, I am also as old school as you are. I honestly, I haven't had a copy. I don't have a copy of the book as yet because of whatever has happened in the last 2 months. Printing presses have been shut, etc. And we've decided to go on with the e-version because we thought that this book talks about creating unique business models. And today, in these times of tough times, supply chains broken down, etc., we really need to create win-win situations and unique business models. What's one skill young entrepreneurs should develop? That's one question from Aditya Raghavan. One skill that an entrepreneur should develop is having an ear close to the ground. That is empathy. And you will find lots of stories about how to enhance one's empathy quotient, be it as an entrepreneur or a corporate executive. Can you give me a practical example of user first, technology later? Well, I spoke about it in the pre-launch as well. I was doing an assignment with a telecalling BPO about 2.5 years back, about 26, 27 months back, to be precise. And they came in with a problem statement saying that they wanted to enhance the efficiency of their calling process. And what happened was we created a small team of about 19 people to delve into this issue. That group included the senior management right down to the lowest person in the hierarchy is the telecaller who makes the calls. Initially, telecallers who were making the call were not being included in the problem solving project, but I insisted, and then they agreed. The management agreed. And when we started discussing all these, the junior fellows were not talking at all. Seniors were hogging the limelight, and they were talking. During one of the breaks, I sat with this junior guy and asked him, "What is it that Please speak. Let us understand your perspective." Also, so he said that when I pick up of the receiver and talk to a prospect, in the first 5 to 6 sentences that the prospect utters, I kind of get to know from the subjective tone, voice tone, I can kind of get a feeling whether it is, whether this call is going to get converted or not. And somewhere that appealed to me a lot. It was a subjective statement, but it somewhere definitely had that connection with the end user. And we brought this up after the break, and I asked that person to speak out, and he spoke about it. And the senior management immediately jumped at us saying that, we have 3,500 phone calls coming in an 8-hour shift. And each caller does about 50 to 60, 50 to 60 calls a day, calls in an 8-hour shift, and 3,500 telecallers doing that, which is about 175,000 to 200,000 calls. And how can we take subjective judgment into account for every one of them? Which is a very valid issue, valid problem. And then we delved deeper and then finally figured out that voice tone is nothing but a sound wave which has amplitude, wavelength, and frequency. And these are perfectly measurable. And then the question was to ask them, how many call logs do you have recorded? They had something like 45 lakh call logs recorded over the previous 10 years. And then the next question was what are the outcomes of these calls? They had those documented also. So then we created a back-end speech recognition voice engine, which categorized all these call logs by correlating it with the outcomes, and 5 categories emerged. Pattern A corresponded to an outright conversion of the prospect. Pattern B, maybe yes. Pattern C, yes, no, maybe fringe. Pattern D, maybe no. And pattern E, outright no. Now, when this speech recognition engine was devised, and it's a self-learning algorithm which got devised, and every time now, I checked with them about 3 months back, and now when a telecaller makes a call to us, within the first 12 words that we utter, the backend voice engine analyzes our voice tone and puts us into one of these 5 patterns. And with these patterns, whichever pattern we fall into, the next conversation flow accordingly appears on the screen in front of that telecaller, thus reducing time, effort, money, manpower, everything. That's where I say user first, technology later. This solution did not come from a techie. It came from the telecaller who was in connect with the last mile user. That's where the idea came from. And then the appropriate technology did not exist in the organization back then. We tied up, collaborated with outsiders, and created that technology. So the right kind of technology comes in at the right time, provided you have got the pulse of the user. That's what user first, technology later. You mentioned 2 books which influenced you very much. Do you advise them to readers, or does your book suffice? Of course, nothing is sufficient. Suresh Kumar Shukla asking that question. Yes, in the acknowledgement section, I have acknowledged the writers of 2 books, Blue Ocean Strategy by Kim and Moburn, and The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt. The Blue Ocean Strategy is a beautiful book, very well researched, very well analyzed. When I read it about 10, 12 years back, the research bug kind of bit me. And the way it was explained with simple concepts, that's what appealed to me. And The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, that kind of influenced my writing style in terms of the narrative. In very simple terms, how can you explain complex concepts? And I have tried to kind of, so to say, imitate that. I don't know, Eliyahu Goldratt is up there, I am down here. So they have influenced me. And yes, I will definitely recommend you guys to go through those books. Uh, and then some more questions. Can you tell a personal experience from your entrepreneurial journey which you carry with even today and feel has taught you a lot? Well, one thing I've narrated in the book as well is, back in 2001, 2002, we used to be creating some special purpose equipment, custom made, custom designed machinery, so to say, SPMs. And we used to make them with very high quality, understanding the consumer, etc., etc., etc. And after selling it for first, say, maybe, 10, 15 machines, our competitors would just reverse engineer, strip our machines down at customer sites and copy them. And we used to lose out in the bargain, copy them and sell it at a much lower cost. And we used to lose out in that bargain quite a lot. And that's when we were really thinking hard how to beat competition, etc., etc., etc. And that's where, after a lot of thinking, we actually did not compete with the competitor, but we collaborated with them. And that's what created, I think that was a big turning point in that phase of mine, that entrepreneurial phase of mine, where I realized that you don't always have to compete, but you have to find out soft spots of competition, their strengths, your strength, and create win-win situations. I'm not going to get into the details of how we did it. That's in chapter number 13 in the book. So mark that for yourself. What else? That's an interesting. Why is the title? It's logical. As per my understanding, you don't have to act logical and try different ways to come up with new things. How can one have a logical framework and yet innovate? Well, that's the whole book about. That's what my whole message through the book is. We have a false notion that innovation and creativity lie in the purview of genius. Through the book, I have tried to simplify that process. Anybody with a sound, sane head on one shoulder and a relentless focus on the user will be able to do it. So I have tried to put a broad framework, if followed, can lead you to breakthrough solutions. My sincere attempt is to break that myth that innovation is not an unexpected aha moment. Some may have happened, even Archimedes, unexpected aha moment, no. The fellow was thinking and thinking and thinking about it for a long, long time. And after years of cultivating that mindset of connecting the dots, was he able to suddenly realize the principle of buoyancy and jumped out of all of that. People talk about it as an aha moment. No, I don't think it's an aha moment. These fellows have cultivated their minds to think creatively, to have open minds, to be able to connect the dots where we mortals don't see those dots. But they have consciously cultivated that thought, the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to challenge assumptions. Only when one challenges assumptions, one gets the answers. And then when you follow these simple principles, then the process sounds pretty logical. Go through it. Lots of stories in that book can prove this fact. Is there a possibility of a stepwise streamlined process of innovation? Yes, I have mentioned it. And that whole thing is summarized in chapter number 15 with that 2611 case, the whole process. And that process can be applied to solving non-business problems, business problem, be it a marketing issue, be it a finance issue, be it an HR issue, be it a systems issue, operations issue, whatever it is, even your family problems, I would say. If you follow that process, you're likely to find some breakthroughs. And it's not a rigid framework. It is a broad framework. It's not a rigid SOP, to so to say. But if you follow it in spirit, yes, you should be able to get it. Uh, Amarkant Jain, does the book take into consideration post-COVID scenarios? Well, when I wrote the book, that was pre-March. COVID-19 was not around. But the book talks about imagining new business models, which the focus is on creating win-win situations. And in a time post COVID, when most supply chains are broken down, a lot of businesses, vendors, processors are lying idle, it is an ideal time to think how we can create win-win situations across different domains, not just your domains. And the book talks about some underlying principles, about 8 of them, which will help create win-win situations. And that, I think, will be very helpful in these post-COVID-19 scenarios that are emerging. Um, Lots of questions, some repeats. Have you ever worked in education sector to innovate the way Indian schools are educating young India? Well, I've been in that space for the last 14 years, 2006 onwards, on a regular basis, and prior to that, on on and off basis or so. And yes, absolutely, education, I think, is changing, and we must admit that it is changing, though not at the pace at which it should. But uh, the moment we take education outside the classroom and in the field, the whole perspective will change. So, firstly, I feel, at least I can talk about business school education and undergraduate education at the final year level also, because I also tackle students from some good engineering colleges as well. I feel, if you can expose students through different levels of risk, through very carefully crafted and engineered projects, whereby the student is exposed to different levels of risk, and the levels of risk go on increasing as one does that project further, as one passes from one year to the second year, etc. If we can introduce that into the curriculum, so let the student go through the experience first, and then the prof comes and talks and connects the dots about the conceptual, theoretical background of the whole thing. If that approach is brought in, I think people will become more interested in sitting in the classroom, listening to profs who bring in that kind of perspective, rather than just being it by rote. And honestly speaking, I do not believe in the system of examinations, because an examination tests you at the end of the semester. I come from a manufacturing background, so I believe testing a product at the end of the assembly line is a useless activity. You better test the product at various stages in the assembly line. So if educators, if teachers can create projects, assignments, which give practical experiences and do regular testing, maybe week by week, fortnight by fortnight, throughout a 6 month semester, so that you don't have to check at the end. You can check for defects right in the process. That's what I draw a parallel from, and that's how education needs to be. Shrikar, would like to know your thoughts on scalable business models and profitable business models. Well, uh, for for a business to succeed, yes, the business model has to be scalable, and has to be profitable, because if it is not profitable, it cannot sustain. And if it is not scalable, then maybe you might be catering to a very, very small market. uh, a lot of companies have succeeded doing that, but there comes a point in time where a lot of competition comes in, and maybe that pie doesn't remain very lucrative. That's the time when you need to look parallelly across the domains, across customer segments, etc., etc., etc. And that's where you need to look at scale. Now, these 7, 8 traits of unique business models that I'm talking about will help one create scale. There is a specific case of an airline company which used to sell private jets. Mark that story in chapter number 2. That specifically will answer your question: how scale can be achieved. Mm, yeah, I think we can take maybe another 2 questions. We have 3 minutes to go. Uh, Recently, I'm seeing a lot of people making video tutorials. This comes from Richard Suman Haldar, um, making video tutorials and selling those hard. Even tutorials making authors too. Do you think no human touch can be the future? Well, everybody has been forced into this digital mode over the last 2 months. So everything is going digital, yes. But that human touch going away fully? No, I don't think so. Because, see, when a child goes to a school, it is not just that the child doesn't learn only through the teacher. The child learns through social interactions which he or she has with his or her classmates. That's where real learning happens. So, are you asking that homeschooling will become the norm? Well, for the time being, till we get used to this virus or whatever herd immunity sets in, etc., people will be careful. People will be wary about going out, etc. But there will come a point in time when life will have to start back as normal, right? And that's where human touch will come back, though with some caveats, some changes. It won't be as touchy feely as we were till February, but yes, human touch matters a lot, and in the learning process, human touch, that nothing can substitute human touch. Yes. All right. We can take maybe one last question. Why this comes from Mr. Dinkar Suri? Why is it that if companies are formed to solve problems for users, entrepreneurs forget this in their journey? Well, I think over the last 4 or 5 years we have seen entrepreneurs are really passionate about solving problems, and somewhere I feel they get into that bandwagon of valuation, and when they get into the bandwagon of valuation, somewhere they lose focus of satisfying the user. They only acquire the user just to show it on his or her balance sheet as an asset, rather than trying to really get into that user's psyche and solve new problems that the user is talking about. So when they get into the valuation game, I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget what they started off with, the passion, the zeal that they started off with, the problems that they wanted to solve, and the difference that they wanted to make in the universe. Somewhere along the line, I think they forget. And that's where I think we as educators need to keep that hammering in. Guys, don't lose the focus. You started off with a dream in mind. You started off with a dream of solving problems. Money will automatically come. But somewhere, I think that whole ball game of profitability to the valuation game, I think that has kind of corrupted some thinking in the entrepreneurial community. But I think people are realizing that now, and value creation in terms of user satisfaction is getting traction back in the game. All right. I don't want to bore you further. Look forward to your comments on the book in the comment section on Amazon. In the meanwhile, on this link that is being shown, do send in your contact details to get your one chapter of the book to read. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to your continuing support. And thank you for a lot of my associates, my students. I have acknowledged some of them in the book, in the acknowledgement section. Thank you very much for making this possible. I hope you enjoy reading the book. Thank you. Bye.